In your opinion, would it be safe or smart for me to increase the dose to bring myself to like the 1,000 nanograms per deciliter? Would that increase potential health risks? Assuming, as you know, I'm on 120 milligrams a week of tests from 100, which resulted in just over 700 nanograms per deciliter. So that's where I'm at right now. In your opinion, would it be safe or smart for me to increase the dose to bring myself to like the 1,000 nanograms per deciliter? Would that increase potential health risks? Assuming like my blood work looks good right now, like based on your experience, like what would you say? Because like obviously my doctor's not going to just like up the dose. That's the dose is for the dose. But if I was to go to an HRT clinic, like something different, like you have the clinic, like what would you say to someone like that? Like I'm like, man, I want more muscle. If I could be 195 instead of 192 and be healthy, is that a risk? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting because obviously within actual like reference range values, it looks like if you push it up to 1,000, it's like, well, you're still within a therapeutic zone. So hypothetically, you would think, well, it can't be much more unhealthy. Like I would say that it also is going to depend largely on where your SHBG is at, because a lot of people don't realize like,
It's on the lower end of normal,
yeah. So like, is it
within
creeping
the
to like,
normal range.
is it close to single digits or is it like
It's
right?
13 point something, I think.
So your free T is like
And
what? Like,
that's 1.5 times the normal reference range, which I forget what the reference range is. But my
yeah.
the test that my body is actually using is like 50% more than what the normal limit is. So although I'm at 700, I'm actually
Yeah.
like higher than what a normal person would be.
Yeah. So like for me, when I think about this, I don't think about it just like obviously, first of all, it's going to depend largely on like, is it something you actually want to do, or is this just a hypothetical scenario?
I gotta say it's got to be hypothetical because I got to listen to my
Yeah.
doctor.
Right. Okay. So like for me, when I think of the test level itself, the total T is not like that problematic. But when I think of the free T too, and the fact that this is like a chronic bleed throughout the day, you're not getting like dips and spikes like a natural production would normally be. You have this chronic bleed of 1,000 nanogram per deciliter constantly, regardless if you're sleeping, regardless if you're awake. And you don't have this regulating mechanism of binding protein, the sex hormone binding globulin, to regulate how much androgenic activity is going on everywhere. So you have like a high normal total, but then a disproportionately high free relative to the average person. And it's chronically elevated. It's not like it's going up and down, up and down. So on paper, maybe your total looks like it's acceptable, sure, but it's like in a like there's something called the sympathetic nerve, like your sympathetic versus parasympathetic, and it's like your ability
Yep.
to rest and digest versus fight or flight, like ancestrally, if I was running from, I don't know, if woolly mammoth, I don't know, like whatever it is, that kind of thing. Androgenic signaling is going to play, like, this is why pre-workout androgens are so effective at getting you like crazy motor unit recruitment and just snapping shit up and becoming like
That's why I'm
acutely.
taking Halo before they go to the gym the last, like, say 4 weeks before a show, especially when I'm depleted. And I'm like, and I take the Halo and I'm like, okay, now I can go train at least. Even though I feel
Yeah.
like shit, my body's just like, go.
Yeah. So when you have this lack of SHBG, not only is it not binding up as much testosterone as it normally would, but in addition to that, DHT, which is 5 times more, or whatever it is, androgenic than testosterone, which is a very, very potent androgen in your brain, as well as, every other tissue in the body that it's affecting. That has a 5 times higher affinity to bind to that binding globulin than testosterone does. So without the SHBG, not only do you have this disproportionately high free T, your DHT free, your free DHT is also way higher than it would normally be. So you have like chronically elevated androgenic signaling in your heart and your brain, where I would not be surprised if it negatively affects somebody's sleep quality. It makes them more stressed out on a perpetual basis, more like on red alert, more like sort of like a self-induced state of like perpetual
An
fight or
emergency
flight.
is happening. You got the woolly mammoth and it's sitting out
Yeah.
your door and you're like, is it going to come and jump on me all the time? So even when you're trying to sleep, you can't sleep. And for me, like when I take Tren, it's over. It's been the worst
Yeah.
drug I've ever taken. It's like, I hate, that's why I won't take it.
So I'm not saying that this would happen. This would just be a concern I would have if somebody was pushing if they were still trying to be like as healthy as possible. I don't necessarily know for certain that somebody could go up to 1,000 given they already have a borderline clinically low SHBG. You're probably going to make it worse by pushing your TRT higher to 1,000.
Yeah, it should go down slightly as you go up in the dose.
So we're going to go into like the single digits perhaps of SHBG. So we have like this hyperandrogenic environment plus a higher T and DHT, extra sympathetic drive going on perpetually because we don't have dips and spikes from natural production. It's chronically elevated. And we have this 24/7. I would imagine the increased stress in all organ systems, but in addition, like mainly your brain too, like being chronically kind of like redlined from the androgenic signaling, I imagine might have some negative impact down the line in terms of, I don't know. I'm just saying like it would be something I would be concerned of, especially given the SHBG being so low. If you had more of that regulating mechanism, it was like closer to the middle, I'd be a bit less concerned because your body's like, that's literally how your body determines how much is going to the tissues, but you don't have that. You just have like a free geyser of hormones going around. So you can't really control and regulate like how much is getting to where, it's all freely circulating and you're perpetually kind of like red line mode. So for me,
given that, let's take this hypothetical case. Is there something else that could be done? For example, taking 10 milligrams of Anavar a day to add to that. Is there something else that could help build more muscle without making it too androgenic, I guess we could say?
Yeah. I don't know if I would add Anavar would like obviously work. I don't think it's a sustainable thing long term to be on an oral steroid, obviously. Like in an acute sense, if this is just like a short-term thing.
No, I'm thinking like long-term for life. Like, and I'm thinking more so like there's people out there listening, they're probably on HRT, but they're not happy. And people ask me all the time, I'm on this milligram and I'm going to blast, I'm going to do 750 and then I'm going to go back to 200 HRT. Then I'm going to go to 750, 200. I'm like, I personally, this is the advice I give them. I'm like, I'd rather see you just do 250 year round rather than 200 and blast the 700 and go back and forth. If that lowest, whatever that lowest dose that makes you happy, I'm like, take that dose. That's advice I give to people all the time. Rather than blast and cruise for health, I'd rather see you on a consistent level that the doctor will okay. That'll say, hey, maybe it's not ideal, but it's pretty good. I'm acceptable on this right now. So is there anything other than just upping that test dose that you could add in to give you that extra, let's call it 5 pounds of muscle that you could maintain year round?
Okay, yeah, there is. But first, let me give the disclaimer for people watching, just so they don't take it out of context.
This is not real advice. It's a hypothetical.
And in addition to that, though, is me saying like, I'm not saying don't go up to 1,000 nanograms per deciliter. Like maybe some people need to go up that high even for basic symptom relief, not even just for muscle, like in a TRT context. Some people need more than others. So everyone has a different androgen receptor content. The dose for one guy is not going to be the same dose for another guy. And, maybe it's totally fine. Like ideally that would be figured out through some sort of metrics. Like, I don't know, you're an aura ring for sleep, how is your deep sleep and REM sleep being impaired? Getting organ imaging, is your heart, getting, impaired by extra androgen exposure in some capacity? There's ways to kind of like assess if it's okay. So I'm just saying like in the context of it might be okay, but those would be the things I'd be cognizant of that I mentioned earlier, like before going into it, just be aware of that stuff. But as far as things to layer on top of tests, like personally, I think the lowest effective dose of multiple different vectors to achieve the same muscle growth outcome is superior to doing a high dose of like androgens versus like no like DH, no this, no that. So there's a lot of different things you could be doing. And I'm not saying this because I'm in favor of GH necessarily. Because to be honest, like I know one of your other questions was, do I think it limits your lifespan? And I if I was concerned about lifespan, I also would be, very, very careful with GH too. But anyways, as far as a muscle growth context, what's the safest overlapping, like comprehensive thing to do the lowest? Like I would probably like a low dose of GH is going to compound the effects of testosterone pretty significantly in terms of proliferating satellite cells that will then have myonuclear donation, allow you to create more ability for testosterone to bind to androgen receptors and cause muscle protein synthesis. That kind of thing is keeping your androgen dose the same, but literally creating more ability to create contractile protein with that same amount of testosterone, with a dose of GH that maybe is like more benign than using higher androgens that have diminishing returns the higher you go. So it's like, GH would be something I'd potentially look at that I feel is.
So, for example, with GH, would it have to be at super physiological levels? Like, are we talking like, could I be taking 1 IU of GH combined with 120 milligrams of HRT, given that my IGF levels are normal per se, like, and I'm not on growth hormone, although I've used it in the past and I've used it in high doses briefly, never really noticed much of it. It was one of the most disappointing drugs I've ever done. But if I added that now, would it actually make a significant difference? And if so, what kind of potential dangers it might have for me for longevity? Like, I want to live to be 100. Yeah. So would 1 IU of GH, would that be dangerous? And would I need 2 to make that difference? Like, because 1 is pretty much just a replacement dose.
Yeah, so that's the thing that's hard when we're getting into like the blanket statements, because it's like some people hyper respond to GH. We're like, this is the best thing ever. Look how much of a difference it made. It literally mutated my physique from, taking me from a top national competitor to now I'm like a good pro or something. But then guys, a lot of guys, not just you, even my experience with GH, and I'm, obviously not a, pro bodybuilder or anything, but some people respond not very favorably. They're like, why is this so hyped up? It's not that great. It's like an expensive fat burner in some cases. Like that's how some people think about it. And then the people who hyper respond to it are like, what are you talking about? Like, you're obviously like getting fake GH. Not the case. Some people just don't respond well. So it's like, in that case, if you're a guy who doesn't respond well to it, maybe that's not the thing to add. And you're definitely right in that. Should you be using something to just replace your natural production? That gets into the discussion again of like, well, your TRT dose replacing natural production, is that worth it? Is that helping you build more muscle than if you just like stayed natural, like at 120 milligrams? Like, there's definitely a level where the chronic exposure plus whatever equivalent IGF you get out of it or whatever is going to be more than whatever your natural production is. It's just about what dose you reach that minimum effective amount that's maybe not super physiological, but it's better within that therapeutic range of pushing you up to the top of it. So yeah, there's like definitely a dose. Maybe it's, closer to, I don't know about you, but like everyone's liver is different in IGF response. But like for me, a few IUs of GH puts me at like close to like 400 to 500. Whereas for another guy, maybe not the case. Like it's even more wildly different than testosterone response when it comes to like what IGF your liver spits out. So I can't say for certain like what the dose would be, but like 1 IU in general, I think is seen as like replacement. And it's even harder to quantify because it's not like there's symptom relief when you take GH versus not necessarily for like, what's the good dose? So I don't know. I think it depends. It's like largely, this was almost a question I was going to ask for you, is some guys don't respond to certain compounds. Does it make sense for those individuals to experiment with different things, given that certain individuals will hyper respond to an androlone versus a boldenone? Should you take the thing that's known to be safer just because it's more people use it? Or should you experiment because maybe you're just like maybe you hyper respond to GH, or maybe you hyper respond to insulin or whatever, like there's definitely an argument to be had for don't just use what everyone is using and like experiment, even if it might not be the norm for what your approach is. But anyway, like I know this is my question, circling back to my question. I think definitely my main approach is the minimum effective dose of however many vectors you can achieve an overall net max amount of muscle growth with the least side effect profile. So that would be, the minimum effective dose of whatever androgens you're using, layered on top of the minimum effective dose of whatever growth hormone precursor you're using, layered on the minimum effective dose of something as basic as an L-carnitine potentially for androgen receptor upregulation, layered upon. Maybe you even add in a little bit of insulin to help with, super saturating and getting, some effect that you wouldn't otherwise be able to leverage through this. But that depends on the person. You don't necessarily need insulin. You don't need this. You don't need that. Maybe you don't need any of that shit. I just prefer, rather than pushing androgens to the sky, and then once you've totally maxed that out because you have side effects, looking at the other stuff, I think everything should be like rock bottom, safe exposure, lowest effective dose, layer it up accordingly based on your goals, as well as what compounds you respond to. If something's totally useless for you, like don't use it. But rather than having all your exposure to something, and once you've maxed that out, introducing the next thing, why not use the minimum effective dose that isn't causing your heart to grow because you're using fucking 3 grams of androgens before you go to GH, and maybe do 500 to a gram, and then you're layering on a little bit of this and a little bit of this and a little bit of this. So that's sort of my approach to PEDs in general, is like, however many vectors you can achieve lowest effective dose of that you respond well to and is well tolerated. And however you want to interpret that in like the HRT context is kind of like, I would not be on an Anavar forever. I would not be on anything non-bioidentical ideally forever. There's nothing I would use that's going to stress out your liver, your kidneys above and beyond. Something your body naturally produces is kind of what I would be looking to first. I would not be looking to, like some HRT clinics literally prescribe oxandrolone, and I don't think it really has a place unless like there's actually niche scenarios where certain individuals have such dysregulated SHBG production that they can't get it down unless they use like an oral agent, like a Proviron or an Anavar. And like 1 out of 1,000 guys on TRT might actually use like a background, like 5 to 10 milligrams of pharma grade oxandrolone to keep their SHBG lower so their test can actually work properly. But that's like such a weird scenario and not applicable for most people. But it's like, that's why it's hard to give blanket statement answers, because maybe like 1 in 1,000, some guy might need Anavar forever to feel better. Not necessarily like maybe the healthiest thing for most people, but for one guy, it might be applicable. So a lot of it is like literally you knowing how to interpret your blood work like insanely well, having a doctor who's like very, very knowledgeable and knows that is not going to judge you for what you're doing. And it's going to work closely alongside with you to help you achieve high level quality of life, all your goals, whilst being mindful of health practices. And I think the lowest effective dose approach of bioidentical compounds and like layering it up accordingly based on goals is the smartest approach, rather than like, arbitrarily using a higher dose of something and then waiting until you get side effects and then adding in something else. That's kind of like how I approach PEDs in general.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Use really low doses of a lot of things at safe doses, rather than just try to, like, as you'd say, leverage one item at a higher dose that's probably going to be somewhat toxic to the body. Just get that low, really low, where it's safe, and add as many things as you can in really safe levels and monitor that. That does make sense. And answering your question about the different products, like, everyone responds to things differently. Like, some people cannot take.
One thing I wanted to add at the end of the video, just because it's relevant to the topic at hand, is where to get high quality care and oversight. So I talk about how critical it is to find a doctor who knows what they're talking about, how to interpret your blood work and diagnostics and make appropriate recommendations based on your individual needs, and how most companies are cookie cutter and do not, frankly, know what they're talking about. To get high quality care and oversight, my clinic is accepting patients right now. We have a full-time staff of doctors ready to go, and we've actually been in business for over half a year at this point. It's just we haven't had enough staff to handle the demand, to be honest. So I've never done a dedicated plug. I just kind of mentioned it in passing, but our website is fully functional. We have a full-time staff right now, and we have more doctors coming on full-time. And to book a call with one of our doctors, all you have to do is click the I am interested in treatment button. And alternatively, if you just want self-service blood work, you just want to get your own labs, and just for the sake of assessing your current health and or using that blood work in the future to potentially undergo hormone replacement therapy or something that may be appropriate, or just assess your what may require optimization or addressing with lifestyle and diet changes, click the I want to buy diagnostic labs button. You can use one of our pre-designed panels. These are panels that I've had input on, as well as all of our patient care coordinators and doctors, and they're kind of designed to be the most cost efficient and or the most comprehensive for certain scenarios. Or you can create your own customized blood test panel right on our site if you only need a few individual markers, or if there's something not included that you need specifically. So check that out. Link is in the description below. Thank you guys for watching. Talk to you soon.